Before we celebrate Claire's little office job, my mother-in-law said, tapping her wine glass, let's remember who actually carried this family. 40 people went silent. My husband stared at his plate. And then my former CEO reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope that changed everything. My name is Claire. I'm 38 years old, and I need to tell you exactly what happened that night. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. My dad drove a delivery truck 6 days a week. My mom cleaned office buildings on weekends so I could have school supplies. We weren't poor in the way that breaks people, but we were the kind of family where nothing came free and nothing came easy. I watched my parents work themselves tired every single week, and I decided early that I was going to build something they could be proud of. I put myself through college on night classes and weekend shifts at a grocery store. It took 5 years instead of 4. I didn't care. I graduated debt-free and walked straight into an entry-level logistics role with absolutely nothing but my degree and my determination. 14 years later, I was a senior operations director. I ran teams, I rebuilt broken systems, I turned the company's weakest division into its most profitable one. It wasn't glamorous work. Nobody wrote articles about it. But every number, every process, every person I promoted, I earned. Then I married Derek, and I married into Diane. His mother had old money, loud opinions, and a very clear belief that I did not belong in her family. She never screamed it. She didn't have to. It lived in the way she looked past me at holiday dinners, in the way she introduced Derek to people and paused just slightly too long before adding my name. I wasn't polished. I didn't come from money. But I had a work ethic and a track record that nobody in that room had bothered to read. This dinner was supposed to be my moment. 14 years of sacrifice, finally honored. Instead, it became a battlefield. And if you've ever worked twice as hard just to be taken half as seriously, I need you to hit that subscribe button right now. You are going to want to stay for every second of this. Drop a comment and tell me you're here. Click hype, and let's go. Derek had reserved a private dining room at one of the nicer restaurants downtown. Round tables with white linen, soft lighting, the smell of warm bread and expensive candles in the air. 40 people, a mix of my colleagues and our family, gathered to send me off after 14 years of service. I had personally invited Richard Holt, my former CEO. He was semi-retired now, but he came. He sat at the head table, calm as always, in a dark jacket, a glass of red wine in front of him. His presence alone meant something to the people in that room who knew who he was. The evening started warmly. People mingled. Old colleagues hugged me. Someone had made a slideshow. For about 40 minutes, it felt exactly like what it was supposed to be. A celebration. Then Diane stood up. She hadn't been scheduled to speak. Nobody had handed her the floor. But Diane had a way of taking up space that made it feel like she'd always been invited. She tapped her fork against her crystal glass, and the room settled into silence the way rooms do when they sense authority. She smiled wide. She said, "I just want to say a few words if everyone doesn't mind." Nobody said they minded. She started soft. "Claire worked very hard. We all know that." A small pause. "But let's not pretend this company would have noticed if she hadn't shown up." Laughter came from her side of the table. Not mean laughter, the kind that hides behind plausible deniability. My colleagues didn't laugh. They went still. Diane continued. "My son supported this family. He held the home together while she played career woman. The real foundation of this family, it wasn't built in any office." I looked at Derek. He shifted in his seat. He looked down at his plate. He said nothing. Diane raised her glass. To Derek, the one who held everything together. Her side of the table raised their glasses. My hands were flat under the table, perfectly still. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I had learned a long time ago that some battles aren't won with noise. Then, across the table, Richard Holt set down his wine glass. Slowly. Deliberately. He reached inside his jacket and removed a sealed envelope. He placed it on the table in front of him. He didn't open it. He didn't explain it. He simply rested his hand on top of it and looked straight ahead. People noticed. Diane noticed. But nobody knew what was inside. I had worked with Richard for 11 years. I knew his habits, his signals, the way he moved when he was preparing to say something that mattered. And I knew exactly what that envelope meant. So I smiled. For the first time all evening, I genuinely smiled. But let me go back, because that night didn't happen in a vacuum. That moment was the last in a long line of moments that Diane had been building for years, and I had been quietly surviving. 3 years before the retirement dinner, Diane organized a 40th anniversary party for Derek's parents. A big family event. Catered, dressed up, the kind of gathering that gets talked about for years afterward. I found out about it when Derek's cousin texted me, asking why I wasn't listed on the invitation as Derek's wife. I had to read that text 3 times before it landed. I went to Derek. I stayed calm. I said, "Your mother didn't include my name on the invitation." He rubbed the back of his neck and said, "She didn't mean anything by it. Don't make this a thing." I went to the party. I smiled at everyone. I helped clear dishes. I said nothing to Diane about it, but I remembered it. I filed it exactly where it belonged, in the part of my mind where I kept the things that were too important to forget. 2 years before the dinner, I discovered something worse. I was reviewing our year-end financial statements, a habit I had kept since the first year we were married, and I found a transfer that didn't match anything I had authorized. Funds from my personal retirement investment account, an account I had been contributing to for years before Derek and I even met, had been partially redirected. The transfer had already been initiated. Derek's signature was on it. When I asked him about it, he looked tired. He said, "It's just strategy, Claire. You're too emotional about money." Those were Diane's words. I had heard her say them before, almost exactly. He had borrowed her sentence and handed it to me like it was his own thought. I reversed the transfer that same week using my sole authority on the account. I said nothing more about it to Derek. The next morning, I opened a separate account in my name only, and I began moving my own earnings there quietly and legally. 8 months before retirement, Diane attended a charity luncheon where 4 of my colleagues happened to be present. She didn't know them well. That didn't stop her. She told them casually that my position at the company was essentially administrative, and that Derek's family connections had helped me get my foot in the door originally. Neither of those things was true. Not even close. 2 junior colleagues repeated the comment inside the office. It reached me within a week. I sat with it for 2 days. Then I walked into Richard's office and asked him calmly for a formal letter of commendation, framed as a retirement keepsake. He didn't hesitate. He signed it that afternoon. Then he looked up at me and said, "Claire, you should have a record of everything you built here." I didn't fully understand why those words felt so important at that moment, but some part of me was already preparing. Here's what Diane never accounted for. I was an operations director for 14 years. Documentation wasn't just a habit for me. It was a professional discipline. It was how I protected systems, tracked problems, and built accountability into everything I touched. And I had been applying that same discipline to my own life. After the savings account incident, I started keeping a private digital file. Screenshots of financial transfers, written records of conversations with dates and details, email threads I had saved, a formal timeline of every exclusion, every undermining comment, every moment where something didn't add up. I noted witnesses where they existed. I kept copies in 2 separate places. I didn't build that file to attack anyone. In the beginning, it was just a way to feel less powerless. When you're told over and over again that you're imagining things, that you're too emotional, that you're making something out of nothing, you start to need evidence just to trust your own memory. But after the charity luncheon, my approach became more deliberate. I wasn't collecting pain anymore. I was building a record. What Diane never understood was that I was trained to see patterns before they became crises. I was trained to prepare before the problem arrived. She thought she was managing a woman who would stay quiet because she always had. She didn't realize that my quiet had never been a weakness. It had always been a strategy. Richard's envelope held something Diane could not reframe or talk her way around. Something official, notarized, and drawn from verifiable company records. I knew that because 3 weeks before the dinner, I had sat across from him at a small coffee shop 2 blocks from his office, and I had shown him everything. I told him I wasn't looking for revenge. I told him I just wanted something real on paper, something that belonged to me, a true account of what I had actually built. He read through the file slowly. He didn't rush. When he finished, he closed the folder and looked at me. He said, "I'll do you one better than a statement." He didn't explain what he meant. I didn't ask. I had known Richard for 11 years, and I had learned that when he made a promise, the details arrived exactly when they were supposed to be. I trusted him. After Diane's speech, the cocktail hour had a different energy on different sides of the room. On her side, there was warmth and movement. She was holding court near the bar, retelling the highlights of her speech to cousins who had missed it, laughing at the parts she clearly considered clever. Derek had relaxed. He was moving around the room, shaking hands, accepting compliments on the event as though it had all gone perfectly. They had decided the night was over. They had decided they had won. My colleagues were quieter. A few of them found me near the window and stood close without saying much. They didn't need to. The way they positioned themselves said enough. I watched Richard from across the room. He wasn't circulating. He wasn't performing. He sat at table 1 with his wine and his envelope, occasionally turning it over in one hand, unhurried and unreadable. He caught my eye once. He gave me one slow nod. They were celebrating before the night was over. That was their first mistake. Their second was ignoring the man sitting quietly at table 1, turning that envelope over in his hands like he was in no rush at all, because he wasn't. When the dessert was announced and the servers began moving through the room, Richard stood. He excused himself from his table, moved to the front of the room, and said simply, "If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment. I've been asked to say a few words, and I think this room deserves to hear them." The room settled. Diane was still standing near the bar. She didn't sit. She held her glass and watched. Richard opened the envelope. He unfolded a single sheet of paper printed on company letterhead, and he held it the way you hold something that matters. He read clearly. He said that Claire personally restructured the company's central operations division and that the changes she implemented generated $47 million in cumulative savings over 6 years. He said that she had been formally nominated twice for a Regional Industry Leadership Award and had won it in 2021. He said that she had trained and promoted 11 team members who currently held director-level positions across the company. He said that her retirement was entirely her own decision, made after a fully vested pension and profit-sharing payout she had earned without exception or compromise. The room was silent in a way that rooms rarely are. Not polite silence, held silence, the kind that comes when people are recalibrating everything they just heard an hour ago. Then Richard turned the page over. He said, "There is one more thing I want the room to see." On the back of the letter was a printed email thread. He explained, without editorializing, that it had been forwarded to him through a company email address. The thread showed a series of messages between Diane and Derek in which Diane suggested, in plain language, that they pressure Claire into accepting a reduced retirement package. Her reasoning, written in her own words, was that Claire won't push back. Diane's glass lowered. Richard said, "I thought the family would want to have a complete picture." Diane's voice came sharp and fast. "That is private correspondence." Richard looked at her with no particular expression. He said, "It was sent to a company email address, Diane. It's not private." Derek was looking at the table. He did not look up. He did not look at me. I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I said, "I didn't come here tonight to fight. I came here to say goodbye to work that I love. I've done that." I looked at Richard. "Thank you." I looked out at the rest of the room. "Everyone else, please enjoy the dessert." I picked up my glass. I leaned across and touched it gently against Richard's. Then I sat back down. Diane sat too. Slowly, the way people sit when something has gone out of them that they can't immediately name. From somewhere near the back of the room, I heard 2 people begin to clap. Quietly at first, the way applause starts when people aren't sure they have permission. Then others joined. It moved across the room in a soft wave and stopped at Diane's table, where nobody moved at all. In the weeks after the dinner, Derek came to me. He was different in the way that people are different when they've been caught and they know it. The apology he gave me wasn't the one I had needed years ago. It was smaller, more frightened. But it was real, and I could tell it cost him something to say it. I looked at him and said, "I forgive you, but I can't unknow what I now know about how much you let her define us." He didn't argue. There was nothing left to argue with. I had already accepted a part-time consulting arrangement before the dinner ever happened. 2 regional firms that Richard had connected me with had asked for me specifically. I set my own hours. I worked from wherever I chose. It was exactly the kind of work I had always wanted on my own terms, with no one managing my worth for me. Diane never spoke about the dinner. Not to me, not in any way that reached me. Her silence was its own kind of answer, and I accepted it as one. I sold my share of the marital home at full market value. Every number documented and clean. I relocated to a smaller city I had always wanted to live in, a place I had mentioned once years ago and Derek had dismissed as impractical. It was exactly as good as I had imagined. I spent 14 years building things for other people. Good things, real things. Things that will still be running long after anyone there remembers my name. I don't regret a single hour of it. But I am done building for rooms that can't see me. From here on, everything I build is mine. If someone in your family ever tried to shrink what you built, I want to hear about it. Tell me your story in the comments. Tell me what happened and tell me how you handled it. I'm reading every single one. Subscribe to this channel and become part of a community that refuses to be made small. And click hype to help this story reach every person who has ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to cheer the loudest. Standing up for yourself quietly, strategically, without breaking, is one of the hardest things a person can do. If you've been there, you know. Subscribe and join a community of people who've had to fight for their own dignity in silence. Let me know this story meant something to you by clicking hype. And tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Click hype to let this one keep moving. Someone out there needs to hear it tonight.